That night, as my family raised their glasses to celebrate my MBA, my sister announced a decision everyone else had apparently already approved. The private room went dead silent, but I did not argue or cry. I simply waited for exactly one phone call. When the speakerphone clicked on, I heard the voice that drained the color from my sister's face, making her look like she had just fallen off a 20-story building. My name is Brielle Hartman, and I was currently sitting in what was supposed to be the seat of honor, though it felt a lot more like the defendant's chair in a capital murder trial. We were in the private dining room of a steakhouse in downtown Chicago, the kind of place where the waiters wear white jackets and the menus don't list prices, implying that if you have to ask, you are in the wrong zip code. The air smelled of aged beef, expensive red wine, and, in my immediate vicinity, the suffocating scent of family judgment. I was 29 years old. I had just walked across a stage earlier that afternoon to accept my MBA from one of the most prestigious business schools in the country. The diploma in my bag represented 2 years of sleepless nights, caffeine overdoses, and complex financial modeling that would make my father's head spin. Yet, looking around this table, I knew that none of those things mattered to the 7 people staring back at me, to the Hartman clan. I was not a woman with a master's degree and a signed contract for a senior consultant position starting in 3 weeks. I was simply Brielle, the baby of the family, the dreamer, the one who needed to be managed. My sister, Candace, sat directly across from me. She was 34 years old and wore her success like a suit of armor. She was a real estate agent in the suburbs, the kind who put her face on shopping carts and bus benches, smiling that terrifyingly perfect smile that promised she could sell your house in 30 days or less. Tonight, she was wearing a sharp cream blazer that probably cost more than my first car, and her blonde hair was pulled back so tight I wondered if it was restricting blood flow to her empathy centers. She wasn't just eating dinner. She was presiding over a meeting. I had seen her operate for years. She needed to be the sun around which the rest of us little planets revolved. My father started, clearing his throat. He looked uncomfortable in his tie, a man who preferred polo shirts and golf courses. The job market. We were reading in the journal that it is really tightening up for you kids. A lot of layoffs in the tech sector, a lot of uncertainty. I took a slow sip of my water. I have had some good interviews. Dad, the sector I'm looking at is actually quite stable. I did not tell him I had already accepted an offer with a starting salary of $160,000 a year, not including the signing bonus. I didn't tell him because I knew how this game was played. In the Hartman family, information was currency, but it was also ammunition. If I told them I was doing well, they would smile, nod, and then immediately look for the crack in the foundation. They would ask about the hours, the benefits, the commute, chipping away until my success looked like a burden they needed to relieve me of. It was easier to let them think what they wanted to think. "Interviews are good, honey," my mother said, her voice dripping with that specific brand of maternal anxiety that feels less like a hug and more like a straitjacket. She reached across the table to pat my hand. "But interviews do not pay the rent, and we know how expensive city living is. Your father and I were talking just the other night about your student loans. Those graduate loans carry high interest rates, don't they? 7, maybe 8%? "Something like that," I murmured, cutting a piece of bread. "It is a heavy burden," she sighed, looking at her wine glass as if my debt were floating in the Merlot. "Starting your life in the red. It is scary. We just want you to be safe, Brielle. We do not want you drowning before you even learn to swim." I chewed the bread slowly. The narrative was being constructed brick by brick. Brielle is in debt. Brielle is facing a tough market. Brielle is fragile. It was a story they had been telling since I was 12 years old and quit the soccer team to join the debate club. To them, I wasn't independent. I was wayward. I wasn't private. I was secretive. And mostly, I was a problem that needed a solution. My brother, Ethan, chimed in from the end of the table. Ethan was 37, and while he was technically the oldest, he had mastered the art of failing upward. He bounced between jobs every 18 months, always with a grand story about how management didn't appreciate his vision. Currently, he was between opportunities, which was family code for borrowing money from mom and dad while he figured out his next move. "You should listen to them, Bree," Ethan said, leaning back in his chair. He had gained weight recently, his shirt buttons straining slightly. "The economy is garbage. You do not want to be stuck holding the bag with all that debt. Trust me, creditors do not care about your degree." There was a bitter edge to his voice. Jealousy. It was a subtle flavor, like a hint of cork in a good bottle of wine, but I could taste it. He hated that I had finished something he never started, but instead of letting that jealousy drive him, he channeled it into concern. If I was failing, then he wasn't doing so bad by comparison. If I needed help, then we were equals. "I am managing, Ethan," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "I have a plan." "Plans are great," Candace cut in. Her voice was sharp, projecting to the back of the room. She wasn't speaking to me. She was performing for the table. "But assets are better, and liquidity is king. You know, in real estate, we see this all the time. Young professionals over-leverage themselves, thinking the big paycheck is guaranteed. Then the market turns, and they are underwater." She paused, taking a sip of her drink, her eyes locking onto mine. It wasn't a warm look. It was the look a predator gives a wounded animal. Not out of malice, necessarily, but out of instinct. She saw weakness, or what she perceived as weakness, and she couldn't help but lunge. "Luckily," Ethan said, grinning as he looked between me and Candace, "you have family who looks out for you. Jesus, Candace has a way to fix things for you, a real clean slate." My stomach tightened. There it was, the hook. I glanced at Candace's husband. Mason. He was sitting next to her, checking his watch. Mason owned a chain of used car dealerships throughout the state. He was a man who lived his life by the art of the deal, always calculating margins. He caught Candace's eye, and a silent communication passed between them. It was a micro-expression, a slight nod, a tightening of the lips. It was the look of two people who had already signed the contract in their heads and were just waiting for the client to stop reading the fine print. They weren't just worried about me. They had done something. The waiter arrived with the main course, breaking the tension momentarily. A massive tray of sizzling steaks was lowered onto the table. The sound of ceramic plates hitting the tablecloth, the clinking of steak knives, the pouring of more wine. It all felt rhythmic, like a countdown. "This looks delicious," my mother said, trying to keep the mood light, but her eyes kept darting toward Candace. She knew. They all knew. I looked at the steak in front of me, a beautiful filet mignon that I suddenly had zero appetite for. I realized then that the seating arrangement wasn't accidental. I was at the head of the table not because I was the guest of honor, but because I was the focal point of an intervention. They had rehearsed this. They had discussed my dire situation without me, validated each other's fears, and agreed on a course of action. They had stripped me of my agency before the appetizers even arrived. "Brielle," Candace said, placing her fork down. She didn't pick up her knife. She folded her hands on the table, the picture of responsible authority. "We wanted tonight to be a celebration, and it is. We are so proud of you. But we are also realistic. We know you, and we know that sometimes you let pride get in the way of what is smart." "What are you talking about, Candace?" I asked. My voice was calm, but under the table. My hands were clenched so hard my fingernails were digging into my palms. "We are talking about your future," Mason added, his voice slick and patronizing. "We are talking about getting you to zero so you can actually start your life." I looked around the table. My father was studying his potatoes. My mother was looking at me with watery, pleading eyes. Ethan was smirking. Candace was staring me down with the confidence of a woman who held a royal flush. They had absolutely no idea who I was. They saw the 22-year-old who cried when she didn't get into her first-choice grad school. They saw the little sister who needed hand-me-downs. They didn't see the woman who had spent the last 2 years negotiating corporate buyouts in simulated boardrooms, who had learned to read balance sheets better than they read the morning paper. They thought they were cornering a frightened girl. "Go on," I said softly. Candace took a breath, her chest swelling with self-importance. She looked at Mason, then back at me. The trap was set, the script was written, and as she opened her mouth to deliver the line that would sever our relationship forever, I realized with a chilling clarity that I wasn't the one in danger at this table. They were. Candace pushed her chair back and stood up. The movement was slow and deliberate, the way a CEO stands up at a board meeting when they are about to announce a merger that will cost half the room their jobs. She smoothed the front of her blazer, looked around the table to ensure she had absolute silence, and then rested her eyes on me. It was a look of rehearsed benevolence, the kind of expression a politician wears when they are kissing a baby they secretly find repulsive. "We have been doing a lot of talking. Brielle," she began, her voice steady and projecting just enough to command the attention of the servers hovering near the door. "Dad, Mom, Ethan, Mason, and I, we have been losing sleep over your situation. We know you are proud. We know you want to make it on your own, but we are a family, and families do not let each other drown just to prove a point." She paused for effect. I could feel the air in the room thicken. My father nodded solemnly, staring into his wine glass as if he were mourning a tragedy that hadn't happened yet. My mother reached for a tissue, dabbing the corner of her eye preemptively. "We decided that we needed to take action," Candace continued. "We needed to liquidate an asset that, quite frankly, is nothing but a drain on our resources and a sentimental anchor holding us back. We are selling the lake house." The words hit me like a physical blow to the chest. For a second, the ambient noise of the restaurant, the clatter of silverware, the low hum of conversation, the jazz music, completely vanished. All I could hear was the rushing of blood in my ears. The lake house. It was not just a house, it was a cabin in northern Wisconsin, sitting on 4 acres of pine forest and 600 feet of shoreline. It was the place where my grandfather taught me how to fish. It was the place where I had spent every summer since I was 5. And more importantly, it was the only place on earth where I felt like I could breathe without someone correcting my posture. "We found a buyer," Candace announced, a triumphant smile breaking through her serious mask. "And not just any buyer. The Miller family from the city. They have been looking for a tear-down property on the water for months. They want to build a modern glass-front estate, cash offer, no contingencies, and they are willing to pay $50,000 over the appraisal value if we close in 20 days. I kept my face perfectly still. It took every ounce of discipline I had learned in business school negotiations to keep my jaw from dropping. She was talking about tearing it down. She was talking about erasing the cedar porch where Grandpa used to smoke his pipe. She was talking about destroying the physical evidence of the only unconditional love I had ever known. "A tear down?" I asked. My voice was quiet, dangerously steady. "It is an old shack, Brielle," Ethan scoffed, reaching for the wine bottle to refill his glass. "The roof needs work. The dock is rotting. It is a money pit. Candace pulled a miracle getting that price for a pile of lumber." "It is for you, honey," my mother interjected, her voice trembling. She looked at me with that weaponized pity that always made my skin crawl. "We know how much you love that place. We all did. But Grandpa would not want you to be shackled by debt just to keep an empty house. He would want you to be free. He would want you to have a fresh start." I looked at my mother. She truly believed it. That was the most terrifying part. She had rewritten history in her head so effectively that she genuinely believed selling my grandfather's legacy was a noble act of maternal protection. She was using a dead man's hypothetical permission to justify stripping me of the one thing he had explicitly left to me. "The Millers are in a hurry," Candace said, pressing on, eager to get to the part where she was the hero. "They wanted to lock it down before the summer rush. So, I took the liberty of handling the messy part. I accepted their deposit this afternoon." My eyes snapped to hers. "You took a deposit?" $20,000, Candace said, beaming. "Non-refundable. And I signed the purchase agreement on behalf of the family. Mason faxed it over an hour before we came here. It is done. Brielle, the sale is pending. Once the title company clears the paperwork next week, the proceeds will go into the family trust, and we will cut a check directly to your student loan servicer. You will be debt-free by the 1st of next month." She said it with such finality. It is done. I looked at Mason. He was busy cutting his steak, avoiding eye contact, but there was a smirk playing on his lips. He knew real estate law. He knew exactly what signing on behalf of the family meant, or rather, what they thought it meant. They operated under the assumption that the lake house was family property, a vague term that meant Dad was in charge. And since Dad was passive, Candace was in charge. "You signed a purchase agreement?" I repeated, ensuring I heard her correctly. "You put your signature on a legal document guaranteeing the sale of that property?" "Someone had to take the lead," Candace said, a hint of defensiveness creeping into her tone because I wasn't jumping across the table to hug her. "Dad gave me his blessing. Ethan agreed. We are the majority, democracy in action. Brielle, you were busy with finals. We didn't want to stress you out with the details." "We are saving your life here, Brie," my father said, his voice gruff. He put his fork down and looked at me sternly. "Do not sit there and look at your sister like she did something wrong. She has been working her tail off to make this deal happen. Do not be stubborn. Do not let your pride get in the way of a business decision." "It is not just a business decision, Dad," I said, allowing a tiny fraction of my emotion to leak out, just enough to make them think they were winning. "It is Grandpa's house." "It is a house," Ethan corrected. "And now it is a check, a big one." Ethan raised his glass high, the red wine catching the light of the chandelier. "I would like to propose a toast," he announced loudly, "to Candace, for being the only one of us with the guts to make the hard calls, and to family, because in this family, we sacrifice for each other, even when it hurts, to the sale." "To the sale," Mason echoed. "To the sale," my mother whispered, wiping her eyes. "To the sale," my father grunted. They all drank. They all celebrated the erasure of my sanctuary. They celebrated the violation of my property rights. Though they didn't know that yet. They sat there, self-satisfied and smug, convinced they had just performed a great act of charity for the poor, incompetent little sister. Candace set her glass down and looked at me, waiting. She wanted the validation. She needed me to say the words that would absolve her of any guilt and cement her status as the family savior. She wanted me to bow down and kiss the ring. I looked at her. I looked at the way her blazer sat perfectly on her shoulders. I looked at the glint of the diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist. I thought about the phone in my purse, the screen dark, waiting for the call I had scheduled for exactly 8:15. I picked up my water glass. I didn't drink, I just held it. "You guys are too thoughtful," I said. My voice was soft, almost sweet. I saw the tension drain out of Candace's shoulders. She exhaled a breath she had been holding. She thought she had navigated the minefield. She thought the stubborn Brielle had finally been broken by the sheer weight of their logic and generosity. She smiled at me, a genuine, terrifying smile of victory. "We love you, Brielle," she said. "We just want what is best for you." "I know," I said. "I really do know." And I did. I knew exactly what they wanted. They wanted control. They wanted to strip me of my independence so they could feel needed. They wanted to sell my house to pay off a debt I didn't have, likely pocketing a management fee or the surplus for themselves along the way. But mostly, I knew that Candace had just admitted, in front of 5 witnesses, to entering into a contract to sell a property she did not own. She had taken money. She had promised a title transfer. She had committed fraud. I glanced at the clock on the wall. 8:14. The second hand swept past the 12. 1 minute left. "So," Mason said, loosening his tie now that the business was concluded, "what are you going to do with all that free cash flow now that you don't have loan payments? Maybe upgrade that old sedan of yours? I have a nice SUV on the lot that just came in." "I will think about it," I said. "But first, I think I need to answer my phone." Right on cue. Before the ringer even made a sound, the screen lit up on the table next to my plate. The name flashing on the display was clear for everyone to see, though none of them recognized it yet. Lakeview Trust Bank, Fraud Department. I reached for the device. "Excuse me," I said, my thumb hovering over the speaker button. "I have to take this. It seems urgent." The most absurd part of this entire performance was not the arrogance or the boundary-crossing entitlement. It was the simple, mathematical fact that the debt they were so desperate to save me from did not exist. I sat there, watching the condensation bead on my water glass, and ran the numbers in my head for the 1,000th time. My student loans were 0. I had paid the final installment 4 months ago. It had not been easy. I had worked 30 hours a week as a freelance logistics consultant while taking a full course load. I had lived in a studio apartment the size of a walk-in closet. I had eaten more ramen and frozen vegetables than I cared to admit. But I had done it. I was completely, 100% solvent. Actually, I was better than solvent. I had a savings account with 6 months of living expenses tucked away, and an investment portfolio that was performing quite nicely. If I had opened my banking app right then and shoved the screen in Candace's face, showing her a balance that likely rivaled her own, the entire premise of this dinner would have evaporated. But I did not do that. I did not say a word. I had learned a long time ago that in the Hartman family, truth was less important than the role you were assigned at birth. It was like a long-running stage play where the script never changed, even as the actors aged. Candace was the responsible one, the savior, the golden child. Ethan was the lovable screw-up who just needed one more chance, and I was the chaos, the dreamer, the one who needed to be managed, guided, and ultimately rescued. If I had told them I was debt-free, they would not have celebrated. They would have been suspicious. I remembered when I landed my first major consulting contract during my first year of the MBA program. I had called my mother, bursting with pride, to tell her I had made $10,000 in a single month. Her reaction was not congratulations. Her voice had dropped to a hushed, worried whisper, and she had asked me if I was doing anything illegal. She asked if I was selling things online. When I tried to explain the scope of the project, she just sighed and told me to be careful because easy money always comes with a catch. They could not process a version of Brielle who was competent. It broke their worldview. If I was competent, then Candace was not necessary. And if Candace was not necessary, who was she? Her entire identity was built on the foundation of being the person who fixed everyone else's messes. She needed me to be a mess so she could shine. She was addicted to the validation of being the big sister who swoops in to save the day. So, over the years, I stopped correcting them. When they assumed I was struggling, I let them assume. When they offered unsolicited advice on how to budget, I nodded and thanked them. It was a survival mechanism. Silence was the only shield I had. It was easier to let them think I was a failure than to present them with a success they would inevitably try to dismantle or diminish. But tonight was different. Tonight, Candace had crossed a line that I had drawn in the sand the day my grandfather died. She had touched the lake house. That house was not just wood and shingles to me. It was not a tear-down opportunity or a liquid asset. It was the only place in the world where I had ever felt seen, my grandfather. A man of few words but immense perception, had understood the dynamic of our family better than anyone. He saw how my parents fawned over Candace's grades and Ethan's athletic trophies while dismissing my sketches or my essays. He saw how I shrank when I was in that house in the suburbs, and how I expanded when I was up north on the water. He had left that house to me for a reason. He had sat me down the summer before he passed, his hands shaking slightly as he poured us both lemonade, and told me that I would need a fortress. He told me that the world, and especially my family, would try to tell me who I was, and I would need a place where I could remember the truth. "This is yours, Brielle," he had said. "Not theirs, yours. Do not let them take it. Do not let them turn it into cash. This is your anchor." For Candace to describe it as a shack and a burden was a desecration. For her to initiate a sale behind my back was a declaration of war. I looked at her across the table. She was glowing with the satisfaction of her own benevolence. She truly believed she was doing a good thing. That was what made her dangerous. A villain who knows they are evil is predictable. A villain who thinks they are a saint will burn your house down and expect you to thank them for the warmth. I could have stopped this 10 minutes ago. I could have flipped the table. I could have screamed that I held the deed, that the taxes were paid, and that her contract with the Miller family was worth less than the napkin on her lap. But if I had done that, it would have just been Brielle being emotional again. Candace would have sighed and told me to calm down. My father would have told me to lower my voice. My mother would have cried and asked why I always had to be so difficult when everyone was trying to help. They would have gaslit me until I was apologizing for being upset that they sold my home. They would have spun it so that I was the ungrateful brat and Candace was the unappreciated martyr. No, I could not fight this with anger. I could not fight this with words. I had to fight this with reality. Cold, hard, external reality. I needed a voice that they could not dismiss. I needed an authority that outranked Big Sister. That was why, 3 days ago, when my property monitoring service pinged me with an alert that a notice of sale had been filed on my address, I did not call Candace. I did not call my parents. Instead, I called my bank. I had spent the last 72 hours setting this trap. I knew exactly when this dinner was happening. I knew exactly what Candace would do because she was as predictable as the tides. She would wait for a public moment, a celebration, to drop the hammer, ensuring I would be too embarrassed to cause a scene. So I had arranged a counter-ambush. I had spoken to a senior risk officer at Lakeview Trust. I had explained the situation, that unauthorized individuals might attempt to leverage or liquidate a property solely in my name. I told them I suspected identity theft or familial fraud. The bank took these things very seriously. We had set up a protocol. I told them to call me at exactly 8:15 in the evening on the night of my graduation to verify the security of my assets. I glanced at my watch again. The seconds were ticking away. I looked at my family one last time. I looked at Ethan, who was already mentally spending the commission he thought Candace would give him. I looked at my mother, who looked relieved that her problem child was being handled. I looked at Candace, who was sipping her wine, probably thinking about how she would brag to her friends tomorrow about how she rescued her drowning sister. They looked so comfortable. They looked so secure in their power. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't fear anymore. It wasn't even anger. It was a cold, clinical detachment. I was about to detonate a bomb in the middle of our family. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the urge to apologize for the noise it would make. This silence, this long, agonizing silence where I let them dig their own graves, was necessary. I needed them to commit. I needed them to say the words, "I signed," and "it is done," out loud. I needed the witnesses. I needed the server refilling the water glasses to hear it. I needed the table next to us to hear it. Because once the truth came out, there would be no walking it back. There would be no, "I was just joking" or "you misunderstood." The phone in my hand vibrated. The screen lit up. Lakeview Trust Bank, Fraud Department. It was time. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of the steak I hadn't touched. I pushed my chair back slightly, creating a little distance between me and the table. "Hello?" I answered, tapping the speaker button with a deliberate, steady finger. The voice that filled the room was crisp, professional, and terrifyingly authoritative. It was the voice of the real world crashing into their fantasy. "Ms. Hartman?" the woman on the line asked. "This is Sarah Jenkins from the Fraud and Asset Protection Division at Lakeview Trust. We are calling to verify some highly irregular activity regarding the property at 4409 Cedar Point Drive." I saw Candace freeze. Her wineglass stopped halfway to her mouth. "Yes, I am here," I said, my eyes locked on my sister. "I have you on speaker. Sarah, my family is here with me. Please, go ahead." I watched as the color drained from Candace's face, leaving her looking like a wax figure melting under a heat lamp. She knew that address. She knew that bank. And for the first time all night, she looked at me not as a project, but as a threat. The trap was sprung. Now, all I had to do was watch it snap shut. I stood up from the table, the leather of the chair groaning against the sudden movement. In any other circumstance, etiquette would dictate that I excuse myself and walk to the lobby to take a call, especially one during a celebratory dinner, but I did not move toward the door. I planted my feet firmly on the plush carpet, right there at the head of the table, turning my body just enough to face the wall of windows overlooking the city, but keeping my family in my peripheral vision. The phone continued to vibrate in my hand, a rhythmic, demanding buzz that cut through the sudden quiet of the room. "I apologize," I said, my voice steady and devoid of the frantic energy they expected from me. "I have to take this. It is my financial advisor." I did not wait for their permission. I swiped the green icon and, with a deliberate motion that felt like pulling the pin on a grenade, I pressed the speaker button. I set the phone down on the white tablecloth, right next to the centerpiece of lilies and hydrangeas. "Hello, this is Brielle," I said. The voice that filled the room was crisp, amplified, and unmistakably professional. It was the sound of institutional power. "Good evening, Ms. Hartman," the woman on the other end said. "This is Sarah Jenkins, Senior Portfolio Manager at Lakeview Trust. I am following up on the urgent inquiry regarding your asset portfolio. Is now a bad time?" "Not at all, Sarah," I replied, smoothing a napkin I had no intention of using. "I am actually at dinner with my family, so I have you on speaker. We were just discussing financial planning, so your timing is actually perfect. Please, go ahead." I looked at Candace. Her face had gone from a flush of victory to a pale, sickly gray. Her eyes were fixed on the phone as if it were a bomb counting down. She knew Lakeview Trust. It was the bank that held the mortgage on the lake house. But more importantly, she knew that a senior portfolio manager did not call a broke student at 8:15 on a Friday night unless something significant was happening. "Understood," Sarah said, her voice echoing slightly in the private dining room. "We completed the expedited review you requested regarding the property at 4409 Cedar Point Drive. I wanted to confirm the current status of the title before we proceed with any changes." "Go ahead," I said. "Our records confirm that you, Brielle Hartman, are the sole title holder of the property." Sarah stated. There was no ambiguity, no hesitation. "The deed was transferred to your name 5 years ago via the Hartman Family Trust, with all taxes and insurance currently up to date and paid from your personal checking account ending in 4492. The silence that followed was absolute. It was not the silence of peace. It was the vacuum of a room where all the oxygen had just been sucked out. My father's fork clattered onto his plate. He looked at me, then at the phone, then at Candace, his eyebrows knitting together in genuine confusion. The narrative he had been fed, that the house was a family asset that was simply under my name for convenience, was dissolving. The bank did not care about family lore. The bank cared about legal reality. "Thank you for confirming that, Sarah," I said, my tone casual, as if we were discussing the weather. "And what about the valuation? My family was under the impression that the property was in a state of disrepair." "That is incorrect based on our latest assessment," Sarah replied efficiently. "We conducted a drive-by appraisal last month when you inquired about the equity line. Given the renovations you commissioned last year, the new roof, the reinforced dock, and the updated HVAC system, the property value has appreciated significantly. The current market value is appraised at $850,000. I heard a sharp intake of breath from across the table. It came from Ethan. He was staring at the phone with his mouth slightly open. $850,000. Candace had just told them she was selling it for a good price to a cash buyer. She had probably quoted them something in the range of $400,000, maybe less, claiming it was a teardown. The gap between her lie and the bank's truth was nearly $500,000. "That sounds right," I said. "And the mortgage balance?" "The remaining principal is $112,000, Sarah continued. "Which brings me to the reason for my call. Given the substantial equity position, over $700,000, and your current credit score of 810, Lakeview Trust would like to offer you a refinancing package. We can lower your interest rate to 4.5%, Or we can open a home equity line of credit for up to $500,000 if you are looking to make further investments. I watched Mason. He was a businessman. He understood numbers. I saw him doing the mental math. And I saw the moment the realization hit him like a physical slap. His wife, my sister, had just announced she accepted a deposit on a house that was legally mine, worth double what she claimed, and she had done it while I was sitting right there. He looked at Candace with a mixture of horror and confusion, his lips moving silently. 800 credit score? Ethan whispered, almost to himself. I thought you were broke. Thank you, Sarah, I said, ignoring my brother. But I do not think I will be needing the line of credit. Are you sure? Sarah asked. With your income verification from your new contract showing a base of $160,000, you qualify for our platinum tier. We could structure this so your payments are interest only for the first 2 years. The room was spinning for them. I could see it. My mother was gripping her wine glass so hard, I thought the stem would snap. She looked at me as if I had suddenly started speaking a foreign language. The daughter she needed to save, the helpless, debt-ridden student, was an illusion. The woman standing before her was in the platinum tier of a private bank, earning more than her father had at the peak of his career. Candace made a noise. It was a small, strangled sound, like a whimper. She reached for her water glass, but her hand was shaking so badly that water sloshed over the rim and onto the white tablecloth. She didn't even notice. She was staring at the phone, willing it to stop talking, willing me to stop this humiliation. But I wasn't done. I appreciate the offer. Sarah, I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel. But actually, I have a different plan. Since my signing bonus clears next week, I intend to simply pay off the remaining $112,000 in full. I would like to own the lake house free and clear by the end of the month. Mason choked on his drink. He coughed violently, grabbing a napkin to cover his mouth, his eyes watering. Pay it off? My father mumbled, his voice hoarse. In full? Yes, I said to the phone, keeping my eyes locked on Candace's terrified face. Please send the payoff quote to my secure email. And Sarah? Please flag the account. No one is authorized to discuss this property, list this property, or make any inquiries regarding this property except for me. Is that clear? Absolutely. Ms. Hartman, Sarah said. I will add a high-security alert to the file immediately. Is there anything else? No, that will be all. Thank you. I tapped the red button to end the call. The silence that returned to the room was heavy, suffocating, and absolutely delicious. The ambient jazz music seemed to have stopped. The waiter seemed to have vanished. There was just us, the family that had come here to dismantle me, and the wreckage of the reality they had crashed into. Candace looked like she was going to be sick. Her skin was pasty, her lipstick standing out like a garish wound. She knew what this meant. It wasn't just that her plan had failed. It was that she had exposed herself. She had taken money from a buyer for a house she didn't own, for a price that was criminally low, and claimed she had the authority to do it. Brielle, Mason whispered, breaking the silence. His voice was trembling. Why is the house solely in your name? It was the wrong question, but it was the only one his brain could process in the shock. I picked up my wine glass, swirling the dark red liquid gently. I looked at Candace, whose eyes were wide and pleading, begging me silently not to say the next part. But she had sold my sanctuary. She had tried to sell my memories for a discount. Because, I said, taking a slow, deliberate sip of wine, Grandpa left it to me, just me, and unlike Candace, I actually read the paperwork. My mother was the first to speak, though her voice sounded brittle, like dried leaves being crushed underfoot. Her hands were trembling so visibly that she had to set her wine glass down, the stem clicking sharply against the china plate. When? She asked, the word barely a whisper. She looked at me not with anger, but with a profound, disorienting confusion, as if I had just peeled off a mask to reveal I was a stranger. When did you get the house? You were in school. You were struggling. We sent you grocery money. I purchased the property on March 14th, 2019. I answered, My tone was not accusatory, it was factual. I was reading the minutes of a meeting they hadn't bothered to attend. 5 years, 2 months, and 4 days ago. Purchased? My father repeated, his brow furrowing. Purchased with what money? You were a student. I used the inheritance Grandpa left me in the separate trust, I explained, slicing my steak finely. I cut a perfect, small square of meat. The one none of you knew about because he set it up directly with his attorney. He left me a small sum of cash, but the bulk of his bequest was an option, a right of first refusal to purchase the lake house from the estate at the tax-assessed value, rather than the market value. He gave me 6 months to secure financing. If I failed, it would have gone into the general family pot to be sold. I looked up from my plate, meeting my father's eyes. I did not fail. I worked 2 jobs. I secured a private loan. I paid the estate. The money was distributed to all of you. Did you never wonder where that extra $40,000 came from that year? The table went silent again. I could see the gears turning in their heads. They remembered the money. Of course they did. Ethan had bought a boat. Candace had leased a luxury sedan. My parents had gone on a cruise to the Mediterranean. They had assumed it was just Grandpa's money, a final gift from the patriarch. They never bothered to read the settlement statement attached to the check. They never looked at the line item that said, proceeds from sale of real property to B. Hartman. To them, money was just magic that appeared in their accounts. To me, it was a contract. But that is not right, Candace stammered. She was gripping the edge of the table, her knuckles white. We talked about this. Dad said the house was ours. He said we just needed to decide when to sell it. I signed the listing agreement. I signed the disclosures. And that, Candace, is the problem, I said, setting my knife and fork down. I leaned forward slightly, clasping my hands. You signed legal documents claiming ownership of a property you have 0% equity in. You accepted a deposit, $20,000, you said, for an asset that does not belong to you. I let the words hang there, heavy and suffocating. In the real estate world, I continued, my voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerously soft. Misrepresenting ownership to a buyer, taking their money, and signing a contract under false pretenses is not a family misunderstanding. It is not a mistake. It has a specific name. It is called fraud. The word landed in the center of the table like a slab of concrete. Mason, Candace's husband, physically recoiled. He was a car dealer. He dealt with contracts and titles every day. He knew exactly what the word fraud meant in a courtroom. He knew it meant treble damages. He knew it meant losing licenses. He turned to his wife, his face draining of all color. Candace, Mason hissed, his voice tight with panic. Tell me you did not actually take the check. Tell me you just held it. I deposited it, Candace whispered, her eyes wide and terrified. Into the business account, to show proof of funds for the other project. You spent the deposit? Mason looked like he was about to have a stroke. I thought it was fine. Candace's voice rose, shrill and desperate. Dad said the house was ours. I thought Brielle just had her name on it for tax reasons or something. I was acting for the family. Ignorance of the title chain is not a defense, Candace, I said. You are a licensed real estate agent. It is literally your job to verify ownership before you list a property. You didn't run a title search? She flinched. Of course she hadn't ran a title search. That would have cost a few $100s and taken a day or 2. Candace was arrogant. She assumed she knew everything there was to know about the Hartman family empire. She assumed I was a placeholder, a puppet. She didn't check because she didn't think I mattered enough to require checking. This is a disaster, Mason muttered, running a hand over his face. If that buyer finds out, if the state licensing board finds out. The energy in the room shifted violently. 5 minutes ago, they were united in a benevolent crusade to save poor, incompetent Brielle from her crushing debt. Now, the spotlight had swung 180 degrees. I was no longer the victim. I was the witness, and Candace was no longer the savior. She was the liability. Brielle, my father said, his voice changing tone. It was no longer the authoritative boom of the patriarch. It was the wheedling, bargaining tone of a man trying to fix a leak. Now, hold on. Let us not use words like fraud. That is aggressive. Your sister made a mistake, a clerical error. She was trying to help you. Helping me by selling my house out from under me? I asked. Without a power of attorney? Without my consent? Without even a text message? She thought she was doing the right thing, my mother cried out, jumping to Candace's defense instinctively. Why are you being so cold? Look at your sister. She is shaking. You are enjoying this, aren't you? I am not enjoying this, Mom, I said calmly. I am protecting myself. If I hadn't stopped this tonight, if that sale had gone through, do you know what would have happened? The buyer would have sued Candace for the title. The bank would have called the loan due immediately because of an unauthorized transfer attempt. I would have been dragged into a legal battle for years. I am not being cold. I am being the only adult at this table. You hid it from us, Ethan shouted, slamming his hand on the table. He was trying to regain control by finding a way to make this my fault. You sat there for 5 years and let us think the house was available. You tricked us. You let Candace walk into a trap. I did not hide anything, Ethan, I replied, turning my gaze to him. Property records are public information. You can go to the county recorder's website right now on your phone and look it up. It takes 30 seconds. The deed was recorded in 2019. The tax bills come to my apartment in Chicago. The insurance policy is in my name. I paused, looking around at all of them. Did none of you ever wonder why you stopped getting the property tax bills for the cabin? I asked. Did none of you wonder why the insurance renewal notices stopped coming to Dad's house 5 years ago? My aunt, who had been sitting quietly at the far end of the table, suddenly gasped. She was a woman who floated through life on a cloud of disinterest, but something clicked. The letters, she murmured. The ones from the estate attorney, after Dad died. What letters? My father asked sharply. The big yellow envelopes, she said, looking at me with wide eyes. We all got one. It had the check, but it also had a stack of papers, a final accounting of the estate assets. I didn't read it. It was so much legalese. I just took the check to the bank. I threw mine in the filing cabinet, my father admitted, his voice hollow. I shredded mine, Ethan said. I thought it was just tax garbage. Exactly, I said. You were all so eager to cash the checks that you didn't bother to read where the money came from. Grandpa detailed everything. He made sure you were paid out for your share of the house's value at the time. You sold your interest in the lake house 5 years ago. You just didn't pay attention to the receipt. The realization settled over them like a thick fog. They couldn't blame me. They couldn't say I lied. I had followed the law. I had followed the will. I had paid them. They had simply been too lazy, too greedy, and too dismissive of me to realize that the little sister was actually the landlord. Candace was weeping now, silent tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. She wasn't crying because she was sorry. She was crying because her narrative had collapsed. She had spent the evening preening, positioning herself as the magnanimous leader of the family, the one who makes the hard choices, and now, in front of her husband, her parents, and the waitstaff, she was revealed to be incompetent and potentially criminal. She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. She realized that I held all the cards. I could call the licensing board. I could call the police. I could call the buyer. Brielle, Candace choked out. Please, the deposit. I already spent half of it. If I have to give it back. You do have to give it back, I said. Tonight or tomorrow morning at the latest. I can't, she sobbed. I don't have the liquidity right now. Mason? She turned to her husband. Mason looked at her with a mixture of disgust and resignation. He was calculating the cost of this mess. He wasn't looking at her with love. He was looking at her like a bad investment he needed to write off. Do not look at me, Mason said coldly. You signed the contract. Candace, you put your name on the line. I told you to check with a lawyer before you took that deposit. You said, I can handle Brielle, remember? Candace stammered, looking back at me. Brielle, you have money. You just said the bank offered you a line of credit. Can't you just cover it? Just until I sell another house? We are family. I almost laughed. It was tragic, really, even now, with the knife at her throat. Her instinct was to ask me to pay for the blade. Let me get this straight, I said, my voice incredulous. You tried to sell my home without my permission. You tried to force me to use the proceeds to pay off a debt I do not have. And now that you have been caught committing fraud, you want me to borrow money against the house you tried to steal, to pay back the money you stole? It is not stealing, my mother wailed. It is just complicated. It is not complicated, Mom, I said, standing up and picking up my purse. It is a crime, and I am not paying a cent to fix it. I looked down at Candace. You wanted to be the one who makes the decisions? You wanted to be the big sister? Then figure it out. Because if that buyer calls me, I am going to tell them the truth. I am going to tell them that you never had the right to sell that house, and whatever happens after that, that is on you. I turned to leave, but I stopped. There was one loose end. One thing that didn't add up. Candace was arrogant. Yes. She was sloppy. Yes. But she wasn't stupid enough to list a property on the multiple listing service without some kind of documentation. The system required proof of ownership or a signed power of attorney to even activate a listing. I turned back to the table. One last question, I said. How did you get the listing live? Candace? The MLS requires a signature from the owner. I didn't sign anything, so whose signature is on that listing agreement? Candace stopped crying. She went completely still. And in that silence, I smelled the smoke of a much bigger fire. You really thought I would not know, I said, my voice low and devoid of the theatricality Candace loved so much. You thought you could list a property, host open houses, accept offers, and enter into a contract, and I would only find out when you handed me a check with a congratulations card attached. You thought I was that disconnected. Candace stared at me, her mouth slightly open, the tears on her cheeks drying into sticky, pathetic tracks. She did not answer. She could not answer. I have a subscription to a title monitoring service, I explained, leaning back in my chair. It costs $19.99 a month. It sends me an instant text message and email alert anytime a document is filed with the county recorder regarding my property, or when a listing status changes on the major real estate platforms. I picked up my phone again, unlocking it and turning the screen toward her. 72 hours ago, I received a notification that a pending sale status was updated for 4409 Cedar Point Drive. I did not call you immediately, Candace, because I wanted to see how far you would go. I wanted to see if you would have the decency to call me before the closing date. But then, I received the invitation to this dinner, and I knew exactly what you were planning. You were going to present me with a fait accompli. You were going to bully me into signing the final closing documents by doing exactly what you did tonight, ambushing me in front of the family so I would be too embarrassed to say no. I was going to tell you, Candace stammered, her voice thin and reedy. Tonight, I was telling you tonight. No, you were telling me you sold it tonight, I corrected her. There is a difference. I took a sip of water. But here is the part you do not know, the part that actually saves your career. If you are smart enough to shut up and listen, yesterday morning, before I even confirmed my attendance at this dinner, I called the law firm representing the Miller family. Candace's eyes went wide. You called the buyers? I called their attorney, I said. A Mr. Henderson, very nice man, very thorough. He was quite surprised to hear from me, considering you had told him the owner was unavailable and traveling abroad. I sent him a copy of my deed. I sent him a sworn affidavit stating that I have never entered into an agreement to sell the property and that I have never authorized any agent to represent me. Candace made a sound like she had been punched in the stomach. She slumped back in her chair, her hands covering her mouth. I killed the deal yesterday. Candace, I said ruthlessly. Mr. Henderson advised his clients to walk away immediately. The only reason they have not sued you for fraud yet is because I asked them to wait. I told them there was a frantic internal family miscommunication and that I would ensure their deposit was returned within 24 hours. I bought you a grace period. I bought you time to fix this before it becomes a felony indictment. The room was absolutely silent. My mother looked at me with a mixture of awe and fear. She had never seen me like this, strategic, cold, and completely in command. She was used to Brielle the peacemaker, not Brielle the executioner. You told them? Candace whispered. So the deal is dead? The deal was never alive, I said. It was a hallucination, and now, you have a problem. You have $20,000 of their money that you need to return, and judging by the look on Mason's face, I am guessing that money is not sitting in an escrow account where it belongs. All eyes turned to Mason. He was furiously typing on his phone, his thumb flying across the screen. He wasn't looking at Candace. He was looking at his own survival. I am texting my corporate counsel, Mason said, not looking up. His voice was flat, detached. I need to know if your signature on that listing agreement exposes our joint assets or the dealership. If you signed as an agent of Hartman Realty or whatever, that is on your insurance. But if you signed as a personal guarantor, Candace, I swear to God, if we lose the house because of this— I didn't mean to, Candace shrieked, the panic finally taking over completely. She grabbed her phone from the table. I will call Mrs. Miller. I will explain. She liked me. We bonded over the kitchen renovation plans. I can smooth this over. Maybe they will still buy it if you just sign the papers. Brielle, please. Do not call her, I warned, but it was too late. Candace was already dialing, desperation making her reckless. She put the phone to her ear, her other hand gripping the tablecloth. Hi, Mrs. Miller? Yes, it is Candace. I know. I heard from my sister, and I just wanted to clarify that this is all a big— She stopped talking. Her face, already pale, turned a ghostly white. She pulled the phone away from her ear slightly, and in the quiet of the private dining room, we could all hear the tinny, furious voice screaming on the other end. Do not call this number again, the voice shouted. Mr. Henderson said you are a fraud. We want our check certified and overnighted by tomorrow morning, or we are filing a police report for theft. Do not speak to me. The line clicked dead. Candace stared at the phone in her hand as if it were a dead snake. She said theft, Candace whispered. Because that is what it is. Candace, I said, taking money for a house you do not own is theft. My father, who had been sitting in a stunned stupor, finally seemed to reboot. He looked at Candace, but the protective warmth was gone from his eyes. He looked at her like a stranger who had just crashed his car. Candace, he said, his voice deep and rumbling, answer Brielle's question from earlier. How did you list the house? The MLS system needs a signature. It needs proof. Who gave you the paperwork? I handled it. Candace evaded, looking down at her lap. No, my father said, slamming his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. You do not just handle a deed transfer or a listing agreement. You need a signature from the owner. Brielle didn't sign it. I didn't sign it. Who signed the papers saying we had the right to sell? Candace stayed silent, her lip trembling. Did you forge her signature? Ethan asked, his voice quiet. He looked terrified. If his sister was a forger, the whole family reputation was mud. No, Candace cried out, looking offended. I would never forge a signature. That is illegal. Everything you have done tonight is illegal, Mason shouted at her. So do not split hairs. I didn't forge it, she insisted. I had an authorization. I received an email from the estate. It said that as the executor's representative, I had the right to market the property if the primary beneficiary was incapacitated or unavailable. I narrowed my eyes. Incapacitated? Is that what you told the MLS board? That I was incapacitated? I just clicked a box, Candace wailed. But I had the email. It was from the estate administrator. It looked official. It had the seal and everything. What email? I asked, my mind racing. Grandpa's estate has been closed for 5 years. The administrator retired to Florida. Who sent you an email giving you power over my property? It was in my inbox last month, Candace said, grasping for a lifeline. It said there was a clause in the trust, subsection B, paragraph 4, that allowed family intervention for financial distress. I printed it out. I showed it to the broker. That is how I got the listing approved. Subsection B, paragraph 4? I repeated. I knew Grandpa's trust documents by heart. I had read them 100 times. There is no subsection B. The trust is a single entity document. There is, Candace insisted. Landon sent it to me. The name hung in the air for a second before it registered. Landon? My mother asked. Cousin Landon? Yes, Candace said. He works in legal now, or he used to. He said he was reviewing old files and found this clause. He said he could help me activate it. He drafted the authorization letter. I just paid him a consulting fee for the paperwork. My father closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose. You took legal advice from Landon? The boy who got fired from the copy center for printing fake concert tickets? He has changed, Candace defended weakly. He has a nice office now. He sent the email from his work address. It looked real. Dad? He said he just wanted to help Brielle. I sat there, putting the pieces together. Landon, our second cousin who had always been a grifter, always looking for a quick score. He knew Candace was desperate for a big sale to boost her numbers. He knew the family dynamic, that they all thought I was broke. He must have fed Candace a forged document, convinced her it was real, and charged her a fee to unlock the property rights. Candace wasn't the mastermind. She was the mark. But she was a willing mark. She wanted the lie to be true so badly that she didn't question why a cousin with a history of petty fraud was suddenly an estate law expert. You paid him? I asked. How much? $5,000, Candace whispered. From the deposit. Mason put his head in his hands. So we are down $5,000. We have to pay back 20, and we have a buyer threatening police action. I can fix it, Candace said, but her voice had no power left. You cannot fix anything, I said firmly. You are done touching this. Mason, you need to write a check to the Millers for the full $20,000 tonight. Use the dealership funds if you have to, but get it to them. Call it a refund for a failed transaction, if you do that, and if Candace withdraws the listing immediately. Mr. Henderson agreed not to press charges. He agreed to call it a clerical error regarding title ownership. Mason looked at me, relief flooding his face. You arranged that? I did, I said. I cleaned up your mess. Nobody has to go to jail. Nobody has to lose their license. You just have to pay back the money and walk away. My mother let out a long, shuddering sob of relief. Oh, thank God. Brielle, thank you. See? She is a good sister. She fixed it. Ethan nodded, looking at me with a newfound respect. That is really decent of you. Bree? They all relaxed. They thought the storm was over. They thought I had played the hero, saved the family name, and now we could all go back to our corners. I had proven my point, humiliated Candace just enough to teach her a lesson, and protected the family finances. Candace wiped her eyes, sniffing loudly. She looked at me, and a flicker of her old arrogance returned. Just a spark. Well, she said, her voice regaining a tiny bit of its edge. I am glad you handled it. Honestly, you should have just told us about the house years ago and none of this would have happened. But thank you. She thought that was it. She thought she could slide by with a half-hearted thank you and a victim-blaming excuse. But I wasn't done. I had saved them from the buyer. I had saved them from the police. But there was one entity I had not saved them from. One entity that did not care about family truces or clerical errors. I am glad you are relieved, I said, checking the time on my phone. It was 8:45. But there is one thing I could not fix. One thing that Mr. Henderson and I could not sweep under the rug. What? Mason asked, freezing halfway through writing a note on his napkin. When Candace listed the house, I said softly, She didn't just put it on Zillow. She submitted the sale contract to the MLS database, and because the sale price was so low, suspiciously low, it triggered an automatic review. A review by who? Candace asked. By the county tax assessor, I said, and more importantly, by the IRS. I looked at my sister, and then at my brother, and finally at my father. You see, when you sold your shares of the estate 5 years ago, none of you reported the income. I checked the public tax liens this morning just to be sure. You all treated that money as a tax-free gift. But it wasn't a gift. It was a capital gain. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. And when Candace tried to sell the house again today, she reactivated the file. The system just flagged a double sale on the same asset, which means, usually within 30 days, the IRS is going to start asking why the Hartman family sold a house in 2019, kept the cash, never paid the taxes, and then tried to sell it again in 2024. The color that had started to return to my father's face drained away instantly. I can stop a lawsuit, I said, standing up and slinging my purse over my shoulder, but I cannot stop an audit. I looked at them one last time. Enjoy your steak. I am going to go home to my house, the one I actually own. The threat of the tax audit hung in the air like heavy smoke, choking the life out of the indignation that had fueled my family all evening. My father looked physically smaller, slumped in his chair as he contemplated the bureaucratic nightmare I had just predicted. But as I stood there, ready to walk away, I realized that leaving now would only solve the legal problem. It would not solve the human one. They were terrified of the IRS. Yes, but they still did not understand why this had happened. They still viewed this as a chaotic accident caused by my secrecy, rather than a systemic failure caused by their own blindness. I did not leave. Instead, I pulled my chair back out and sat down. Sit down, Dad, I said, gesturing to his chair. He obeyed automatically, his eyes unfocused. We need to talk about Grandpa, I said, because clearly, none of you actually listened to him when he was alive, and you certainly didn't listen to him after he died. We listened, my mother whispered, clutching a napkin. We loved him. You love the idea of him, I corrected gently, just like you love the idea of me. But you didn't pay attention to the details. Grandpa was a forensic accountant for 40 years. Do you really think a man like that would leave a messy estate? Do you think he would leave a house to the family in a vague, undefined way that would cause fights? I looked around the table. They were listening now, truly listening, stripped of their pretenses. He structured the inheritance with surgical precision. I continued. He knew exactly who you were. He knew Dad wanted retirement security, so he left Dad the primary life insurance policy. He knew Mom wanted comfort, so he left her the annuity. He knew Ethan and Candace wanted liquid cash for their lifestyles. I glanced at my siblings. He left you both substantial stock portfolios, I said. Blue-chip stocks, dividend-paying assets. He put them in individual trusts managed by the firm, designed to pay out quarterly dividends directly into your primary checking accounts. I waited a beat. Have none of you checked your deposit history in the last 5 years? I asked. Have you seriously not noticed the money coming in every 3 months? The silence that followed was different from the previous silences. It was the silence of embarrassment. It was the silence of people realizing they had been walking past gold bars on the sidewalk because they were too busy looking at their own reflections in shop windows. I saw some deposits, Ethan admitted, his voice low. He rubbed the back of his neck, looking anywhere but at me. From HA Trust Management, I thought it was, I don't know, I thought it was a tax rebate, or maybe a class action settlement check. I just spent it. You thought the government was sending you $3,000 every quarter for 5 years by accident? I asked. I didn't question it, Ethan snapped defensively, though there was no heat in it. Money is money. I figured if it cleared, it was mine. I turned to Candace. And you? The real estate mogul who tracks every penny? Candace looked down at her manicure. I thought it was Mason's, she murmured. I thought it was commission overrides from the dealership. I never looked at the source code on the bank statement. It was just extra cash. It wasn't enough to make a huge difference, so I just used it for groceries or shopping. It was $12,000 a year, I said. For 5 years. That is $60,000. Candace, you have received $60,000 in passive income from Grandpa, and you didn't even know it was him. I let that sink in. He gave you the money because he knew that is what you valued, I said. He gave me the house because he knew I was the only one who would fix the roof instead of selling the copper wiring. He didn't hide anything. You just didn't care enough to read the labels. It was a devastating realization for them. It wasn't that they were stupid. It was that they were so accustomed to a certain level of comfort, so used to the world just working out for them, that they didn't bother to examine the mechanics of their own lives. They were passengers in a car they thought they were driving. Candace suddenly looked up, and her face twisted. It wasn't sorrow. It was a flash of that old, familiar resentment. The shame was too much for her to process, so she converted it instantly into anger. "So that is it," she spat out, her voice trembling with a toxic mix of humiliation and rage. "You did this to prove a point. You sat on that house, you fixed it up, you got your big fancy degree, and you hid it all just so you could have this moment. You wanted to prove you are smarter than us. You wanted to prove you are better than me." "Candace," Mason tried to warn her, but she cut him off. "No! She planned this!" Candace pointed a shaking finger at me. "She let me list the house. She let me embarrass myself. She could have called me the second the sign went up, but she waited. She wanted to watch me fail. You think you are so perfect. Brielle, you are just cruel." I looked at my sister. I saw the insecurity radiating off her like heat waves. For her entire life, she had been the golden child. Her identity depended on me being the screw-up. If I wasn't the screw-up, then she wasn't the savior. And if she wasn't the savior, she was just a woman who had committed fraud and lost her grandfather's money. "I am not trying to prove I am better than you, Candace," I said quietly. "I am trying to stop being the failure." The words hung there. "Do you have any idea what it is like?" I asked, looking from her to my parents. "To sit at every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every birthday, and be treated like a project? To have every achievement questioned? To have every decision second-guessed? I didn't hide the house to trick you. I hid it because I knew that if I told you I owned it, you would have found a way to ruin it for me. You would have told me I couldn't afford the taxes. You would have told me I was overwhelmed. You would have offered to manage it for me. And then you would have sold it exactly like you tried to do today." My mother let out a sharp sob. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. "We just wanted to help," she cried, her voice muffled. "We just wanted you to be okay. I worry about you so much. Brielle, I stay up at night worrying." "That is not love, Mom," I said. "That is anxiety. You used me as a container for your fears. You convinced yourself I was helpless so you could feel useful. You didn't want me to be okay. You wanted me to be dependent." "That is not true," my father protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "It is true," I said. "Look at tonight. You were going to sell my house to pay off a debt I didn't have. Did anyone ask me if I had debt? Did anyone ask to see a loan statement? No, you assumed. Because the version of Brielle that lives in your head is a disaster. And you love that version. You love her because she makes you feel competent." My mother looked up, her eyes red and swollen. For the first time, I saw a crack in her delusion. She looked at me, the real me, the woman in the tailored suit with the 800 credit score, and she realized she didn't know who I was. She had been mothering a ghost. I didn't know," she whispered. I really thought." "I know you did," I said, "and that is why I stayed away. That is why I didn't come home for Easter. That is why I live in the city." The table fell silent again. The waiter hovered near the door, sensing the heavy atmosphere, wise enough not to approach with the dessert menu. Then, my father cleared his throat. He poured the last of the wine into his glass, his hand steady now. but his face looking older than I had ever seen it. "He told me," my father said. We all turned to him. "What?" Ethan asked. "Grandpa," my father said, staring into the dark liquid in his glass. "He told me he was leaving the house to you, about a month before he died. We were sitting on the porch. He told me he was setting up the option for you to buy it." "You knew?" Candace whispered, looking betrayed. "But you told me the house was ours. You told me we just had to wait for probate." "I lied," my father admitted. He looked up at me, and his eyes were filled with a complicated mix of shame and defiance. "I was angry. Brielle. I was his son. I was the one who drove him to his doctor appointments. I was the one who mowed the lawn those last few years." And he looked me in the eye and said, "Warren, you will just sell it. You do not love the water. Brielle loves the water." It hurt. It felt like he was skipping me. "So you just pretended he didn't say it?" I asked, feeling a cold chill. "I thought you would fail," he said bluntly. "I thought you wouldn't be able to come up with the money to buy the option. I thought the 6 months would run out, and the house would default back to the estate, and then I would be in charge again. I figured Grandpa was just being senile. I figured nature would take its course and you would, you know." "You figured I would be Brielle," I finished for him. "Yeah," he sighed. "I figured you would be Brielle. And when the check came from the estate 5 years ago, I assumed you had borrowed money from a boyfriend or something, or that the lawyers made a mistake. I didn't want to dig into it. I didn't want to admit that he was right, that he chose you over me." He took a drink of wine. "And then, when Candace started talking about selling it, I just went along with it. It felt like correcting a mistake. It felt like putting things back in the right order. The father decides. The big sister executes. The little sister receives help. That is how it is supposed to work. That is how it works in a dictatorship, Dad," I said. "Not in a family." "Well," he said, setting the glass down, "we are not much of a family tonight, are we?" He was right. We weren't. We were just a group of people connected by blood and a shared history of misunderstandings. The scandal of the fraud was fading, replaced by something much heavier, the realization that they had been mourning my potential while I was busy fulfilling it. They didn't hate me. They just didn't recognize me. "So," Ethan said, breaking the tension with a nervous laugh that sounded out of place, "I guess this means I am not getting a cut of the sale, huh?" "Shut up, Ethan," Candace said, but there was no fire in it. She looked defeated. She looked at me, and I saw her reevaluating everything, the clothes I was wearing, the way I held myself, the way I had spoken to the banker. "You really paid it off?" she asked quietly. "The whole mortgage?" "I will next week," I said. "My bonus is substantial." "What? What kind of consulting do you do?" she asked. It was the first time in 10 years she had asked me a question about my life that wasn't a setup for a lecture. "Supply chain optimization for heavy industry," I said. "I specialize in crisis management." Candace let out a short, dry laugh. "Crisis management? Well, I guess that explains tonight." She looked at her husband, who was still texting the lawyer. She looked at her parents, who were staring at their plates. "I am sorry," she said. "It wasn't the big, dramatic apology I might have wanted. It was small, it was grudging, but it was real. I shouldn't have signed the papers. I got greedy, and I wanted to be the hero." "I know," I said. "But you are still a bitch for letting me call the buyer," she added, her voice cracking. "I know," I smiled slightly, "but I am a solvent bitch with a lake house." For a second, just a second, there was a glimmer of something that looked like respect in her eyes. It wasn't affection yet. We were too far gone for that. But it was the acknowledgement of a peer. She realized, finally, that the hierarchy had collapsed. I looked at the check for the dinner that the waiter had silently placed in the center of the table. "I will get it," I said, reaching for the leather folder. "No," my father said, reaching out to stop my hand. "No, you have paid enough tonight." He looked at me, his eyes tired and sad. "Let me buy dinner," he said. "It is the least I can do for the owner of the lake house." It was a concession. It was a surrender. And as he handed his credit card to the waiter, I knew that the dynamic had shifted forever. They would never be able to look at me and see the helpless little girl again. They might not like the woman who replaced her, but they would never, ever try to sell her house again. The peace at the table lasted for exactly 3 minutes. It was the amount of time it took for the waiter to process my father's credit card and return with the receipt. During those 180 seconds, I saw Candace's brain working. I saw her processing the shame, the fear, and the humiliation, and then, inevitably, I saw her reject them. Candace did not do shame. Her psyche was built on a foundation of absolute superiority. If she was wrong, the world had to be wronger. If she had failed, it had to be because someone had sabotaged her. She watched my father sign the receipt with a heavy hand. Then, she turned to me. The tear tracks were still on her cheeks, but her eyes had hardened into stones. "You knew," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it had a vibration to it, like a violin string about to snap. "You knew I was talking to the Millers. You said you got the alert 72 hours ago." "I did," I replied, sipping my water. "So you let me do this," she accused, her voice rising. "You let me take their check. You let me deposit it. You let me come here tonight and make a toast. You sat there and watched me hang myself when you could have sent one text message 3 days ago and stopped it all." "I could have," I agreed. "And if you had sent me one text message asking for permission to sell my house, none of this would have happened. Do not reverse the victim order here. Candace." "It was a trap." She slammed her hand on the table, causing the couple at the next table to look over in alarm. "You set a trap for your own sister. You wanted me to commit fraud so you could hold it over my head. That is sick. Brielle, that is twisted." "It is not a trap to expect adults to follow the law," I said calmly. "I did not force you to forge a listing agreement. I did not force you to spend a deposit that wasn't yours." "I didn't forge it," she shrieked. "I told you, I had the authorization from Landon. I thought it was real. But you manipulated Grandpa, didn't you?" The accusation came out of nowhere, desperate and ugly. "Excuse me?" I asked. "Grandpa was 89 years old," Candace argued, looking at our parents for support. "He was confused. He was on medication. You were always over there, spending the summer with him, making him lemonade, reading to him. You probably whispered in his ear day and night. You probably convinced him that we hated him and that you were the only one who cared. You coerced him into signing that option over to you." "Candace, stop," my father said, looking pained. "Grandpa was sharp as a tack until the end." "Was he?" Candace challenged. "Or did Brielle take advantage of an old man to steal the family inheritance? She got the house for pennies on the dollar. That is millions of dollars in equity she stole from us. And now she sits here acting like she is the moral authority? She is a con artist." It was a breathtaking display of projection. She was accusing me of the exact crime she had just attempted to commit. "I paid the appraised value," I said, my voice dropping to 0 degrees Kelvin. "And I have the medical records proving Grandpa's competency attached to the trust documents. But keep talking. Candace, please, I am sure the Miller's lawyer would love to hear your theory that the title is invalid because of elder abuse. Go ahead. Give them more ammunition to sue you." "I have protection," she blurted out. "I signed the indemnification agreement with the brokerage, and I have the power of attorney document that Landon drafted. It holds me harmless if the seller information is inaccurate." Mason froze. He turned his head slowly toward his wife, his neck moving like a rusted hinge. "What did you just say?" Mason asked. The agreement," Candace faltered, realizing she had said too much. "To get the listing commission up to 6%, I had to sign a waiver guaranteeing that I had full legal authority to sell. It is standard." "You signed a personal guarantee?" Mason asked, his voice strangling in his throat. "Candace, look at me. Did you sign as Candace Hartman, agent, or did you sign as Candace Hartman, individual?" I don't know," she stammered. "I just signed where they told me. I needed to lock in the 6% rate because I promised Landon a 20% referral fee. 20%? I asked, raising an eyebrow. You were going to pay Landon 20% of the commission for a fake email? It wasn't fake to me, she yelled. Where is this document? Mason demanded. Where is this power of attorney you say you have? It is in my email, Candace said, clutching her phone to her chest. I have it. Show it to us, I said. If you have a power of attorney granting you the right to sell my house, show it to me right now, because if it exists, it is a forgery, and I will have Landon disbarred before morning. I can't open it, she lied, her eyes darting around the room. The signal in here is bad. My data isn't loading. The Wi-Fi is excellent, I countered. Mason, ask her to show you the phone. Give me the phone, Candace, Mason ordered, holding out his hand. No, you are all ganging up on me, she cried, pulling away. I am the victim here. I was trying to help the family. I was trying to liquidate a dead asset to save Brielle from poverty. Why is nobody thanking me for the effort? Because you pledged our house, Mason roared, losing his temper completely. If you signed a personal indemnification and that deal falls through because of fraud, the brokerage can come after our personal assets to recover their legal fees. You might have just put a lien on our home, Candace. The reality of that statement hit the table like a grenade. My mother gasped. Ethan looked down at his plate, suddenly very interested in his mashed potatoes. She wouldn't do that, my mother said weakly. Candace is smart. Candace is broke, Mason said brutally, and she is desperate, and now she has dragged me into it. Ethan, who had been silent, decided this was the moment to be the peacemaker, or at least his version of it. He looked at me with pleading, annoyed eyes. Okay, look, Ethan said, waving his fork. This is getting out of hand. Mason is freaking out. Candace is crying. Brielle, you just said you are making huge money. You have this platinum banking status or whatever. He leaned forward. Why don't you just fix this? Pay the Millers the $20,000 back for Candace. Cover the legal fees. Just write the check. You can afford it. It is pocket change to you now, right? Why make Candace suffer just to prove you are right? Be the bigger person. I looked at my brother. It was the classic Hartman maneuver. When one of the favorites creates a disaster, it is the duty of the scapegoat to absorb the impact to keep the peace. So, I said, looking him dead in the eye, your solution to Candace trying to sell my house illegally is for me to pay for her mistake? It is family, Ethan shrugged. We help each other. No, I said. You help yourselves, and you use me as the ATM or the emotional punching bag depending on the day. I stood up again. This time, I picked up my purse. Helping is not wrong. Ethan, I said, my voice clear and carrying to the corners of the room. I have helped you plenty. I paid for your car repairs last year, when you said you were short. I sent Mom and Dad to Hawaii for their anniversary. But there is a difference between help and submission. You do not want my help. You want my compliance. You want to control my life, my assets, and my decisions. And you want to call it love. Well, I am done buying that definition. You are so cold, Candace hissed. Money has changed you. Money has revealed me, I corrected, and it has revealed you. Candace couldn't take it anymore. The walls were closing in. Mason was glaring at her with hatred. I was looking at her with pity. The narrative had collapsed. She needed to escape. She needed to find a new reality where she could still fix this. I am going to call the broker, she announced. Standing up so abruptly her chair tipped over. She didn't pick it up. I will fix this. I will tell them it was a title error. I will get them to sign a mutual release. You will see. I don't need your money. Brielle, I can handle my own business. She grabbed her purse and stormed toward the door of the private room, her heels clicking angrily on the floor. Candace, sit down, Mason shouted. Do not make any more calls until we talk to a lawyer. I am fixing it, she yelled back, pushing through the double doors and out into the main dining room. Mason groaned and put his head on the table. I have to divorce her. I am going to lose the dealership. You won't lose the dealership, I said to Mason. But you need to separate your finances immediately, and you need to make sure she doesn't sign anything else tonight. I can't control her, Mason said. She thinks she is a genius. I looked toward the door where Candace had exited. Through the glass panels, I could see her standing in the hallway near the host stand. She was pacing frantically, phone pressed to her ear. She looked manic. She was gesturing wildly, trying to sell one last lie to someone, probably the broker, or maybe even trying to call the Millers again. Then she stopped. I watched through the glass as she pulled the phone away from her ear. She stared at the screen. A notification had just come through. Even from 20 feet away, through a pane of glass, I saw her posture collapse. It wasn't the slump of defeat. It was the physical recoil of terror. She dropped her purse. It hit the floor, spilling lipstick and keys. But she didn't bend down to pick it up. She just stared at the phone. She turned around and looked back into the private room. Her eyes met mine. She looked like a ghost. She pushed the door open and walked back in. She didn't stomp this time. She walked like she was wading through deep water. "Candace?" my mother asked, sensing the shift. "What is it?" Candace walked to the table and placed her phone in the center, right on top of the breadbasket. The screen was still lit up. "It is a text," Candace whispered. "From the Miller family." "I told you not to call them," Mason yelled. "I didn't," she said, her voice trembling so hard she could barely form words. "They texted me." I looked down at the phone. The message was displayed in a gray bubble on the lock screen. It was long, detailed, and written in the precise, terrifying language of a person who is done negotiating. "Mrs. Hartman, we just spoke to the county recorder. There is no pending title transfer. We also spoke to the real owner, your sister, who confirmed you had no authorization. You have 1 hour to wire the funds back. If the money is not in our account by 10 o'clock tonight, we are forwarding your emails and the fake contract to the district attorney's office. We are pressing charges for felony theft by deception and wire fraud. This is not a warning. The police report is already drafted." "Felony," Ethan read the word out loud. "Wire fraud," Mason added. "That is federal. Candace, that is prison time." Candace looked at me. The arrogance was gone. The anger was gone. There was only a naked, terrified child left. "Brielle," she whispered, falling to her knees right there on the restaurant carpet. "Please, I don't have the money. I spent $5,000 on Landon. I spent $5,000 on credit card bills. I only have $10,000 left. Please, they are going to arrest me." I looked down at my sister. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had inverted. She was on her knees, begging for the life she had tried to destroy. "Get up, Candace," I said. "You are embarrassing yourself." "Help me," she sobbed, grabbing the hem of my skirt. "Please, I will do anything. I will sign anything. Just don't let them call the police." I looked at the time. It was 9:15, 45 minutes. I looked at Mason. "Do you have $10,000? I can move some inventory money," Mason said, his hands shaking. "But it will take time to clear. I can't wire it in an hour." "Then we have a problem," I said. I looked at Candace. This was it. This was the moment where I could walk away. I could let the hammer fall. She deserved it. She had earned every single consequence coming her way. But if she went to prison, the house, my house, would be forever tied to the scandal. And despite everything, I did not want my graduation dinner to end with my sister in handcuffs in the lobby of a steakhouse. "I will pay the $10,000 difference," I said. Candace gasped, looking up at me with hope. "But," I added, holding up a hand, "there are conditions, and they are not negotiable." "Get up," I said again, my voice cutting through the sound of Candace's sobbing like a knife through heavy fabric. "We do not have time for this. If you want to stay out of a federal courtroom, you need to stop acting like a child and start acting like a business partner." Candace sniffed, wiping her nose with the back of her hand, and scrambled back into her chair. She looked small, deflated, and utterly dependent on me. It was a reversal of roles so complete, it was almost disorienting. But I did not have the luxury of enjoying it. I was in work mode now. The same part of my brain that managed supply chain disruptions for Fortune 500 companies had taken the wheel. I pulled a notepad from my purse, I always carried one, and clicked my pen. "Here is how this is going to work," I said, my tone brisk and clinical. "I am going to wire $10,000 to Mason's account immediately. Mason, you will combine that with your funds and wire the full $20,000 back to the Millers. You will send a screenshot of the confirmation to their attorney by 9:55. Mason nodded frantically, already opening his banking app. "I can do that. I am logging in now." "Candace," I turned to my sister, "you are going to write an email to the Millers right now. I will dictate it. You are not going to make excuses. You are going to admit to a clerical error regarding the title search. You are going to say that you are operating under outdated information regarding the estate and that you are withdrawing the listing effective immediately." "But if I admit error," Candace stammered, her voice trembling, "won't they sue me for negligence?" "Negligence is a civil issue, Candace," I explained patiently. "Fraud is a criminal one. If you admit you were sloppy, you lose your commission and maybe get a fine from the board. If you insist you were right when you were wrong, you go to jail for theft by deception. Pick one." She swallowed hard. "I will write the email." "Good. And tomorrow morning," I continued, "you are going to self-report this incident to your managing broker. You are going to tell him that you listed a property based on insufficient documentation provided by a third party. That would be Cousin Landon. And that you have already refunded the deposit. If you come to them first, they might just suspend you for a month. If they find out from the Millers, you will be blacklisted for life." My father shifted in his chair. "Do we really need to involve the broker? Can't we just keep this in the family? If the money is paid back, no harm done, right?" I turned to my father. He still didn't get it. He still wanted to sweep the debris under the rug and pretend the house was clean. "Dad," I said firmly, "this is not a spilled glass of milk. This is wire fraud. There is a paper trail. The IRS is watching. The MLS database is watching. If Candace tries to hide this, she looks guilty. If she owns it, she looks incompetent. Incompetence is survivable. Guilt is not." I looked around the table. "I am offering you a lifeline," I said. "I am willing to cover the financial gap. I am willing to guide you through the legal wording so you do not incriminate yourselves further, but I'm not doing this so we can go back to pretending everything is fine. There is a cost to my help." "We will pay you back," Ethan said quickly. "I mean, Candace will, with interest." "I do not want interest," I said. "I want a new social contract." I let the pen rest on the notepad. From this moment on, nobody in this family makes a decision about my life, my finances, or my assets without asking me first. You do not assume I need help. You do not assume I am drowning. You ask. And if I say, "I am fine," you respect that. You do not try to fix me behind my back. "We just wanted to be parents," my mother wept softly. "We just wanted to secure your future." "My future is secure. Mom," I said, "it has been secure for a long time. You were just looking in the wrong direction." I hesitated for a moment. I had not planned to tell them this next part. It felt like giving away a piece of myself that I had fought hard to keep private, but I realized that unless I showed them the full extent of their ignorance, they would always treat the lake house as a fluke, a lucky break from Grandpa. They needed to understand that my independence was a pattern, not an accident. "You are worried about my rent," I said. "You are worried about my cost of living in Chicago. You think I am scraping by." "It is an expensive city," my father muttered. "It is," I agreed. "That is why, 2 years ago, when the market dipped, I used the dividends from my portfolio, the ones you guys spent on cars, to put a down payment on a 3-flat building in Logan Square. I live in the top unit. The rents from the other 2 units cover the mortgage and my living expenses. I actually turn a profit of about $1,200 a month just from living in my own house." The silence that followed was heavy. Ethan's jaw actually dropped. Candace stopped typing on her phone and looked at me as if I had grown a second head. "You own an apartment building?" Ethan asked, his voice full of awe and a little bit of fear. "In the city?" "I do," I said. "And I did not tell you because I knew what would happen. You would have told me it was a bad area. You would have told me tenants are a nightmare. You would have tried to talk me out of it, or worse, you would have tried to get involved." "We would have been proud," my mother insisted, though her voice wavered. "Maybe," I said, "but you also would have made it about you, about how you helped me, about how the family is doing well. I needed something that was just mine." Ethan shook his head slowly. "You are not just surviving. Bree, you are killing it. You are doing better than any of us." There was no jealousy in his voice this time, just a stark, sobering realization. He looked at Candace, who was frantically trying to save her career, and then at me, the little sister who was quietly building an empire while they played pretend. "I don't need you to say I am killing it," I said. "I just need you to treat me like an adult. I need you to understand that when I say no, it is a complete sentence, and when I am silent, it is not because I am weak, it is because I am thinking." Mason looked up from his phone. "The wire is sent," he said, his voice exhausted. "I sent the confirmation to the lawyer. It is done." Candace hit a button on her screen. "Email sent," she whispered. I copied the broker. We sat there for a moment, the adrenaline fading, leaving behind a profound exhaustion. The crisis was averted. The police were not coming, but the family dinner was effectively over, and the family we had been when we walked in was dead. "Can I?" my mother started, then stopped. She looked at me tentatively, like I was a volatile chemical. "Can I come see the lake house? Not to check on it, not to see if you're taking care of it. Just to visit? I miss the water, and I think I miss my daughter." It was the first honest thing she had said all night. She wasn't asking to inspect my asset. She was asking to enter my world, on my terms. "You can come," I said. "Next weekend, but you call first, and if I say I am busy, you do not come." "I understand," she said, nodding quickly. "I understand." Candace looked up from her phone. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her mascara smudged. She looked stripped down, raw. The blazer that had looked so powerful earlier now seemed too big for her. "I didn't ask," she said. "It wasn't an excuse. It was a statement of fact." "No, you didn't," I replied. "I just assumed," she continued, her voice hollow. "I assumed you didn't know what you were doing. I assumed the house was rotting. I assumed I was the only one who could maximize the value. It never even occurred to me that you might have a plan." "That is the problem. Candace," I said, "you mistake your own noise for competence, and my silence for ignorance." "I am sorry," she said, and for the first time in 34 years, she actually sounded like she meant it. "I really am. I almost destroyed everything tonight." "You did," I said, "but we fixed it." I stood up. I was done. I had paid the ransom, negotiated the treaty, and established the new borders of our relationship. "I am going to head out," I said. "I have a long drive tomorrow. I want to get to the lake house before noon." "Brielle," Candace said, stopping me as I reached for my coat. "Yes?" "There is one thing," she said, her brow furrowing. She looked genuinely confused now that the panic was receding. "The broker, when I report this tomorrow, he is going to ask." "Ask what?" "How the listing got live on the MLS," she said. "I mean, I know I had the fake email from Landon, and I know I signed the indemnification, but technically the system shouldn't have accepted it. The MLS pulls data from the county tax records automatically. If the name on my listing agreement, the Hartman Family Trust, didn't match the name on the tax record, Brielle Hartman, the system should have rejected the upload instantly. It is an automated failsafe." I paused. She was right. I knew real estate systems. They were designed to prevent exactly this kind of error. You couldn't just list a house owned by person A under the name of person B. The database would flag the mismatch and block the publication until a human verified the deed. You are saying the system glitch? I asked. No, Candace said, shaking her head slowly. I am saying someone overrode it. When I uploaded the file, it gave me a mismatch error. I called the IT support desk at the brokerage to complain. They said they couldn't fix it without a manager's code. She looked at Mason, then back at me. But then, about 10 minutes later, the listing just went live. I thought Landon fixed it, or maybe the system just updated. But now that I know Landon is a fraud, who approved the override? A cold feeling settled in my stomach. It wasn't the panic of the police this time. It was the icy realization that we had missed a player in this game. Candace was the face of the fraud. Landon was the forger. But neither of them had the technical clearance to bypass the MLS security protocols. Someone else was involved. Someone who had access to the back end of the real estate system. Someone who wanted that sale to go through fast, regardless of who actually owned the title. Did you talk to anyone else? I asked sharply, besides Landon and the Millers? No, Candace said. Well, just the financing guy, the mortgage broker Mason uses for the dealership. He said he could expedite the closing if we used his title company. I looked at Mason. Who is your mortgage broker? Mason looked pale. It is a guy named Chen, but he just does the paperwork. Wait, I said. There is no Chen in this story. Who are you talking about? Sorry, Mason corrected himself, looking confused. I mean, his name is Carter Lewis. I don't know why I said Chen. Carter Lewis. He handles all our floor plan financing. He introduced us to the Millers. Carter Lewis introduced the buyer? I asked. This was new information. Yeah, Candace nodded. He said he had a private client looking for a lake property. He connected us. He said he would handle the title work to make it smooth. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was a notification from my bank, the one I had set up earlier. But it wasn't about the wire transfer to Mason. It was an alert from the credit bureau. Inquiry detected. Lewis & Associates. Title Services has requested a copy of your credit report. Why would a title company be pulling my credit report at 9:30 at night, after the deal was supposedly dead? Candace, I said, my voice very quiet. Did you give Carter Lewis my social security number? I might have, she whispered. It was on the old tax returns Mom gave me. For the file. Why? Because, I said, looking at the notification that was still glowing on my screen. I think Carter Lewis didn't just want the commission. I think he was trying to steal the title. I looked at my family. They looked back at me, wide-eyed and clueless. They thought the danger was over because the police weren't coming. They didn't realize that we had just stumbled into something much darker than a family squabble. We are not done, I said, grabbing my purse. Mason, give me Carter's number, now. My phone buzzed again, but this time it was not a warning from the bank or a threat from a creditor. It was a secure file transfer from my attorney, David, whom I had texted under the table 20 minutes ago while Candace was sobbing. I had asked him to pull the metadata on the listing and run a background check on the estate authorization Candace had referenced. David was expensive, but tonight he was worth every penny. Put the phone down. Mason, I said, my voice cutting through the panic like a razor. You do not need to call Carter Lewis. You do not need to call anyone. I tapped the file on my screen, waiting for the PDF to load. It was a forensic report of the digital footprint surrounding the sale of 4409 Cedar Point Drive. Why? Mason asked, his thumb hovering over the dial button. You said he was trying to steal the title. I was wrong, I said, looking at the document. Carter Lewis is real, but he is just a mortgage guy who wants a commission. He isn't the one pulling the strings. He didn't override the MLS security protocol. I looked up at Candace. She was wiping her eyes, looking exhausted and broken, but there was still that flicker of confusion on her face. She genuinely didn't understand how she had gotten this far into the woods. You said Landon sent you the email, I said. The one giving you power of attorney? Yes, Candace sniffed. From the estate administrator. It had the seal. Look at this, I said, sliding my phone across the tablecloth so she could see it. It was a zoomed-in screenshot of the email header she had forwarded to the broker. Read the sender's address, Candace, out loud. Candace squinted. admin@hartmantrust.net. Grandpa's estate attorney used a .com address, I said. And look closer at the name Hartman. There are 2 N's at the end. Candace blinked. Hartman? With 2 N's? It is a spoofed domain, I said. Someone bought that domain name 3 weeks ago for $12.99. They created a fake administrator persona just to send you that authorization letter. But why? Candace whispered. Landon said he found the file. Why would he fake it? Scroll down, I commanded. She scrolled. The next page of the report was a log of the IP addresses that had accessed the MLS backend to force the listing live. Your listing was rejected by the system at 4:30 p.m. on Tuesday. Due to a title mismatch, I explained, translating the technical jargon. At 4:45 p.m., an override command was entered using an administrative password. That command came from a static IP address registered to Copyright Solutions, LLC, in Schaumburg. Candace gasped. That is Landon's office. That is where he works. Exactly, I said. Landon didn't find a loophole. Candace, he forged a document to trick you into thinking you had legal standing. Then, he used his old credentials, or credentials he stole from his time in legal admin, to hack the verification system and force your listing through. He didn't help you sell the house. He set you up. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. He knew, I continued, my voice relentless. He knew you were desperate for a sale. He knew you were arrogant enough not to double-check the spelling of your own last name on a legal document. He charged you $5,000 for a fake paper, and then he negotiated a 20% referral fee on the back end. If the sale went through, he would have walked away with nearly $30,000, and when the fraud was inevitably discovered, who signed the listing agreement? Who signed the indemnification? You did? He used me, Candace whispered, horror dawning on her face. He made me the fall guy. He made you the scapegoat, I corrected. He knew that if the buyer sued, they would sue Candace Hartman. He knew that if the police came knocking, they would find your signature, not his. He sat back in his office, collected his consulting fee up front, and let you walk into a felony charge completely blind. My father let out a low groan. Landon, I invited that kid to Thanksgiving. I gave him a card for his birthday. He is a grifter, Dad, I said, and he saw Candace coming from a mile away. Candace put her head in her hands. The narrative she had built, that she was the savvy businesswoman, the leader of the family, was completely incinerated. She wasn't just a fraud. She was a fool. She had been played by the family failure because she was too blinded by her own ego to see the red flags. I am going to kill him, Mason growled, his face turning red. I am going to drive to his house right now and— You are going to do no such thing, I interrupted. Violence will just add assault charges to the wire fraud charges we are currently trying to avoid. I took my phone back and opened a new document. It was a draft agreement my lawyer had prepared in the last 10 minutes. This ends now, I said, placing the phone in the center of the table. I am not sending anyone to prison tonight, but I am also not letting this slide. We are going to execute a family settlement, but it is going to be legally binding. I looked at Candace, then at Mason, then at my parents. Here is the deal. Option A. I let the Millers file their police report. The investigation will uncover everything I just told you. Candace goes down for fraud. Landon goes down for forgery and cybercrimes. The family name is dragged through the mud, and Mason loses his dealership. Mason flinched. Or option B, I continued. Candace, you are going to call Landon right now. You are going to put him on speaker. You are going to tell him that the deal collapsed, and the buyer is demanding a refund of all fees. including his $5,000 consulting cut. You are going to tell him that if he doesn't wire that money back to Mason's account by midnight, you are handing over the IP logs and the spoofed emails to the FBI. Candace's eyes widened. He will be terrified. That is the point, I said. He is a coward. He will pay it back to save his own skin. That covers the cash loss. As for you, Candace. I paused, looking at my sister. She looked so small, huddled in her expensive blazer. You are going to self-report to the licensing board tomorrow, I said firmly. You are going to accept the suspension. You are going to pay the fine. And you are going to sign a document admitting that you acted without my authorization. You will send a formal apology letter to the Millers, copying their lawyer, taking full personal responsibility. My license, Candace whispered. They might suspend me for a year. Better a year suspension than 5 years in federal prison, I said. Take the deal, Candace. She looked at our parents. Usually, this would be the moment where my mother would intervene. She would say, "Oh, Brielle, isn't that too harsh? Can't we just protect her?" She would try to smooth the edges, to cushion the blow. But my mother remained silent. She looked at Candace, really looked at her, and saw the destruction that her unchecked entitlement had almost caused. She realized that by protecting Candace from consequences all her life, she had created a woman who thought she could sell her sister's house without permission. "Listen to your sister," my father said, his voice gruff and final. "Do what she says." Candace slumped. The last line of defense was gone. The family was no longer enablers. They were witnesses. "Okay," she whispered. "I will do it." "Good," I said. "Call Landon, now." The next 10 minutes were the most satisfyingly tense moments of the entire evening. Candace dialed Landon. When he answered, his voice was cocky, full of false cheer. "Hey, Candy, did the wire hit? Are we popping champagne?" Candace didn't falter, guided by my handwritten notes on the napkin. She laid out the trap. She told him about the IP trace. She told him about the spoofed domain. She told him the FBI was mentioned. We listened as Landon's cockiness evaporated into stammering panic. We heard the fear in his voice. He folded instantly. He promised to wire the $5,000 back within the hour. He begged her not to forward the emails. He sounded exactly like what he was, a petty crook caught in the headlights. When Candace hung up, the room was dead quiet. Mason's phone pinged. "The Miller's lawyer just emailed," he said, reading the screen. "They received the refund confirmation. They are standing down. They agreed to sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding the incident as long as we cover their attorney fees." "I will pay the fees," Candace said quietly. "I have some savings left." It was over. The bleeding had stopped. The house was safe. The legal threat was neutralized. I stood up, smoothing down my skirt. The dinner plates were still full of cold steak and untouched sides. It was a waste of a good meal. But we had feasted on something much heavier than beef tonight. We had eaten the truth, and it was a bitter, necessary meal. "One last thing," I said, looking at all of them. "The lake house." I saw them tense up. "It is not an asset to be liquidated," I said. "It is not a safety net for your bad decisions. It is mine. Grandpa left it to me because he knew I would keep it standing. It represents the fact that I can stand on my own 2 feet, without your help, without your approval, and without your permission." I looked at my father. "You were angry that he skipped you," I said. "But he didn't skip you. Dad, he just knew that you already had everything you needed. He gave me the house so I could find what I needed." My father nodded slowly. He looked ashamed, but also relieved. The secret was out. The burden of the lie was gone. "I am proud of you, Brielle," he said. It sounded rusty, like a phrase he hadn't used in a long time. But it was genuine. Not because of the money, but because you handled us. You protected the family when we didn't deserve it. "Thank you," I said. I picked up my purse and walked toward the door. I didn't hug them. It wasn't a hugging moment. We were survivors of a shipwreck, washing up on different shores. As we walked out of the restaurant, the silence was heavy. It wasn't the comfortable silence of a happy family, nor was it the angry silence of a fight. It was the silence of people who had just woken up from a long, collective dream and were seeing the harsh morning light for the first time. Candace walked a few paces behind me. She didn't try to catch up. She didn't try to lead. She just walked, her head down, carrying the weight of her own choices. I reached my car, my sensible, reliable sedan that I had paid for in cash, and unlocked the door. I looked back at them standing under the valet awning. They looked like a portrait of a family that was just beginning to understand how to be real. I got in, started the engine, and checked my phone one last time. There was an email from my bank confirming the wire transfer to Mason, and right below it, an email from Sarah at Lakeview Trust with the subject line, "Refinance options, expiring soon." I swiped left and hit delete. I didn't need to refinance. I didn't need a loan, and I certainly didn't need to sell. I put the car in drive and pulled away, leaving the steakhouse, the scandal, and the old version of Brielle in the rearview mirror. Families can forgive almost anything. I thought as I merged onto the highway, heading toward the lake, they can forgive debt. They can forgive fighting. They can even forgive fraud. But the truth? The truth is the one thing that, once sold, you can never buy back at the same price. And tonight, I had kept mine priceless. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It was a wild ride from that dinner table to the final confrontation, and I hope you enjoyed seeing Brielle take her power back. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening while driving, cooking dinner, or maybe relaxing at your own lake house? Let me know in the comments below. I love reading about where our community is from. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel, hit that like button to support the video, and smash the hype button so more people can hear this story. Your support means the world to me. See you in the next video.